Alright guys, we're going to go over today the Unit 1 Remediation Study Guide. So, if we look, starting at the first question, let PQ represent the statement below. I know that the grass is wet is P, and it rained or someone ran a sprinkler is Q. I want to know what statement is logically equivalent to the original conditional statement. Our key phrase here is logically equivalent, and to the original conditional statement, our contrapositive is what is logically equivalent. And keep in mind, your contrapositive is negative Q, arrow, negative P. So now, let's look at our choices at the bottom. I'm going to label them all out. That way it's real easy to see which one is. So first I have, if it rained or someone ran a sprinkler. Well, that's Q. The grass is wet. That's P. This is actually not your contrapositive. This is your converse. And the converse is not logically equivalent to the original. It's logically equivalent to the inverse. If I look at B, it did not rain and someone did not run a sprinkler. That is negative Q. The grass is wet is P. I need both of them to be negative for the contrapositive. So now we have, if the grass is not wet, well, that's negative P. And then I have, someone did not run a sprinkler. That's negative Q. This is your inverse. So again, not the contrapositive. Just to double check, we now have negative Q on the bottom, and we have negative P. So D is your contrapositive, which is logically equivalent to the original. If we look at our second question, what is the inverse of the statement below? Well, first of all, keep in mind, your inverse means you're going to negate the sentence, which means instead of PQ, it's going to be negative P arrow, negative Q. Now, looking at my original, my P is if an animal is a horse. My Q is it wears horseshoes. So again, we're going to label all of our sentences. If an animal wears horseshoes, that's Q, then it is a horse. That's P. This is not your inverse. This is your converse. You flipped your sentence. If I look at B, an animal is not a horse, so that is negative P. It wears horseshoes, Q. Well, that is nothing we have learned. If an animal is not a horse, negative P. It does not wear horseshoes, negative Q. That is my inverse. And if we look at the last one, just to make sure, it does not wear horseshoes is negative Q. It is not a horse, negative P. This is your contrapositive. You flipped and negated your sentence. Our third question asks, what is the contrapositive of the statement below? Now, keep in mind, for the contrapositive, you flip and you negate it. So it's going to become negative Q, arrow, negative P. So now looking at our original sentence, the lengths of all the sides of a polygon are equal. That is my P, being a regular polygon, is my Q. So again, label everything. The most important thing is to label because it's going to make life a lot easier to pick from your choices. So, if a polygon is regular, that is Q. The lengths of all sides are equal. That is P. This is your converse. All you did was flip it, but you have to make sure you negate it as well. B, if a polygon is not regular, so that's negative Q, not all the sides have equal lengths, that's negative P. That looks like my converse, but let's double check everything just to make sure. If the length of all sides are equal, that's P. It is not a regular polygon, negative Q. That's no special type. And if the lengths are not equal, that's negative P. It is not a regular polygon. That's negative Q. So again, we did one part of the contrapositive. We negated it and created our inverse, but we need to make sure we do both. If we look at question 4, it gives us our statements P and Q. It says which conditional statement is logically equivalent, and again, you have your original conditional is logically equivalent to your contrapositive, and you have your converse is logically equivalent to your inverse. So if the measure of angle is 98 degrees, then the angle is obtuse. Well, if the measure of an angle is 98 degrees, that is Q. The angle is obtuse is P. If we have Q arrow P, we know that that is our converse because our original conditional statement is PQ and the converse flips it. Well, looking at what I wrote above, we know the converse is logically equivalent to the inverse. And in the inverse, we negate our original statement. So instead of PQ, it's going to be negative P, negative Q. So in this case, it is letter A. Letter B is your contrapositive. Letter C is no special type, and letter D is your original conditional. So the thing to keep in mind is we need to make sure they're logically equivalent. The original and the contrapositive are, and your converse and inverse are. If we look, which statement is a valid conclusion? Well, just as a reminder, if you do the law of syllogism, it should be P arrow Q, Q arrow R. Our conclusion then should be PR. We get rid of the Q's. If we talk about detachment, we still start with P arrow Q, but now I need P to come first and Q to come second. It needs to stay in that exact order. For our contrapositive, we still start with PQ, but again, contrapositive we flip and negate, so we're still following that same procedure. We need negative Q first and then negative P last. Well, if I look, I have P arrow Q, that starts everything, but now I have negative P second. If I look at all the second lines, none of them say negative P. So there is no valid conclusion able. We cannot assume, because it's negative P, that the next line will be negative Q. There is no law of inverse. It is only contrapositive, so you have to be able to flip and negate it. Which argument is valid? The easiest way to do a question like this is to try all the different options. So if our QST is a rhombus, and then it is a kite, so that is PQ. Our QST is a rhombus, that is P, therefore it is a kite. Well, looking at my laws on the last page, and this should be a Q, it is the law of detachment. If we look at the next one, we still have PQ at the beginning, but now our QST is not a rhombus. That is negative P, and we have negative Q. We just said on the last page that it does not work. There is no law, so that is invalid. The third one, we still have PQ. Our QST is a kite. That is Q and P. We cannot have QP. Detachment says we need to stay in order, and contrapositive says we need to flip it, which this does, but we also need to negate it. So this is also invalid. If we look at the last one, we have P and we have Q. It is not a kite, which becomes negative Q. However, our QST is a rhombus. The beginning first two lines look like it's the law of contrapositives, but because this last line just has P, it is an invalid conclusion. In order for this last line to work, it would have to be negative P, not positive P. So in this case, the only answer we have is number 1. Dan made the following statement. If I do not babysit on Friday, P, I will not make $10, Q. If I do not make $10, still Q, then I will not go to the movies on Saturday. This is your law of syllogism. Which of the following conclusions can be drawn? Well, I know, since I have my two Q's here and here, that those cancel. So now I'm left with, if I do not babysit on Friday, then I will go to the movies on Saturday. So Dan did not babysit on Friday, then he did not go to the movies on Saturday. Syllogism just cancels out the middlemen that are the same, and you keep the two parts that are the same. Aaron made the following statements. If it is not sunny on Saturday, then I will not go to the beach. If I do not go to the beach, I will not play volleyball. Again, we have PQ and QR. So I'm going to get rid of my two Q's. I am left with, if it is not sunny on Saturday, I will not play volleyball. So if we look at our statements, if it is not, ooh, I apologize for that one, circling the wrong answer there. That is actually your contrapositive. Your correct answer should be letter D. If it was not sunny on Saturday, then Aaron did not play volleyball. And be careful about that. I was quick to circle it because it had Saturday in the beginning, but make sure you read the entire statement. Now, which is a valid conclusion that can be drawn from these statements? If a quadrilateral is a rhombus, then it is a parallelogram. If the quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then its opposite angles are congruent. Again, this is our law of soliloquism. So we're going to get rid of our Q's, and we're left with, if a quadrilateral is a rhombus, then opposite angles are congruent. So if we look at the bottom, every quadrilateral is a rhombus. Well, we have the rhombus part of it, but we don't have R where it talks about our opposite angles. That doesn't work. B, every parallelogram is a rhombus. Well, if I look at my P and my R that are left, I don't have anything left in there that talks about a parallelogram. So that is not true. Opposite angles of a rhombus are congruent. Well, R tells me we have opposite angles, and it tells me a quadrilateral is a rhombus. So that's going to be our answer. If we look at D, it says opposite angles of a quadrilateral are congruent. It has R, our opposite angles are congruent, but the key difference here is the difference between quadrilateral and rhombus. Part P, it says if a quadrilateral is a rhombus. So we are talking about a rhombus. D is not specific enough. We need to make sure that all the words are included in our conclusion. Given the statements, if a shape is a parallelogram, then opposite angles are congruent. A rhombus is a parallelogram. The key words here, we have shape and rhombus. You have to decide, is a rhombus a shape? And it is. So in this case, we're going to call this P. Well, if I have PQ and then I start with P again, we can use the law of detachment. That tells me my conclusion needs to be Q. So my opposite angles need to be congruent. Letter A says a rhombus has opposite angles that are congruent. And we are talking about a rhombus, so that's important. We're not using B because of the word sides. It does not talk about the sides in the problem. It does not talk about the diagonals in the problem. And it does not talk about being a quadrilateral in the problem. Even though we know a rhombus is a quadrilateral, we have to go with what is given to us in the specific problem. Now, what is a counterexample for the following conditional statement? The big thing to keep in mind here is a counterexample proves something wrong. So if you can prove or give a reason to prove something wrong, then it's not true. So if it is summer, then it's June. Well, if I talk about summer, I know that I have 3 months. I have June, I have July, and I have August. So June and July and August are summer. My last part says it's June. I need a counterexample to prove that if it's summertime, it is not actually June. And in this case, the only answer up here would be July. July is an example that says, hey, it's summer, but that doesn't mean it has to be the month of June. Our last one, determine whether each statement is valid or invalid and by what law. Again, make sure you're labeling your P's and your Q's. If I'm socially awkward, then no one will show up to my birthday party. So I have P and Q. Jasmine showed up to my party. That is negative Q because it says no one will show. Well, Jasmine is someone and she showed. So if I have PQ, I have negative Q, it is valid because this is now negative P, so we are doing our contrapositives. If we look at letter B, if I play wide receiver on the football team, P, then I am a fast runner, Q. Bria is a fast runner. Well, that's Q. Bria is a wide receiver. That's P. In this case, this is invalid. There is no law that says we can switch Q and P without negation.